Hello, and welcome back to our quiet corner of the internet. Find a comfortable place, dim the lights and let the clamor of the world outside fall away. Tonight we are traveling back in time, not to a battlefield or a royal court, but to a small hollowed-out patch of land in the heart of West Virginia. We are going to a place of profound and enduring mystery, a place where a family's American dream was incinerated in a single terrible night, leaving behind nothing but questions that have smoldered for over 75 years. Our story begins on Christmas Eve 1945. For most of the world it was a time of unprecedented hope. The Second World War was finally over. Soldiers were coming home, families were reuniting, and for the first time in years the future felt bright. That festive, hopeful spirit was alive and well in the home of the Sodder family in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Their house was full, warm, and noisy with the excitement that only children can bring to a holiday. But as the snow began to fall softly on the Appalachian hills, a different kind of darkness was gathering, a darkness that would descend upon this family and never truly lift. This is the story of the Sodder children. It is perhaps the most haunting and baffling unsolved disappearance in American history. On that fateful Christmas Eve, a fire tore through the Sodder family home. In the morning the house was gone, reduced to a smoking ruin. George and Jenny Sodder and 4 of their 10 children had managed to escape. But 5 others, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were nowhere to be found. The official explanation was simple. They had tragically perished in the blaze. But from the very first moments that explanation felt wrong. There were no bodies, no bones, no teeth, not a single shred of physical evidence to prove that the children had died. Tonight, we will meticulously piece together the events of that night and the agonizing decades that followed. We will examine the strange series of events that preceded the fire, the ominous threats, the cut phone line, the missing ladder. We will follow George and Jenny Sodder on their lifelong heartbreaking quest for answers, a quest that would lead them down a rabbit hole of bizarre clues, alleged sightings, official incompetence, and a potential cover-up that points toward a chilling true crime conspiracy. This is more than just a ghost story. It is one of the quintessential Appalachian mysteries, a tale deeply woven into the fabric of its coal mining community. It's a story about a family's unbreakable love, their refusal to accept the unacceptable, and the cold, terrifying possibility that 5 children were stolen in the night, their fates remaining a mystery to this very day. So take a deep breath. We are about to step into the cold, dead ashes of a Christmas mystery that time has refused to forget. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the family at its heart. The Sodders were, in many ways, the embodiment of the American dream. The patriarch, George Sodder, was an immigrant. He was born Giorgio Sodder in 1895 in Sardinia, Italy. He came to the United States at the age of 13, traveling with an older brother who, for reasons lost to time, returned to Italy almost immediately, leaving the young George to fend for himself in a new and foreign land. He never spoke much about his life back in Italy, a silence his children would later find significant. He was driven, hard-working, and fiercely intelligent. He found work on the railroads carrying water to work crews, before settling in the rugged hills of West Virginia. There he found a home in the thriving Italian immigrant community of the Appalachian coalfields. He also found love. He met Jenny Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter who was also an Italian immigrant. They married and began to build a life together. George started his own trucking company, hauling dirt for construction projects and later coal. He was successful. The Sodders weren't fantastically wealthy, but they were comfortable, respected, and had carved out a prosperous life in their adopted homeland. They lived in a large 2-story timber frame house just outside of Fayetteville, a house they filled with children, 10 of them in total. The Sodder household was a lively, chaotic, and happy place. John, the eldest, was 23 and had just returned from serving in the war. Marion, the eldest daughter at 17, worked at a local dime store and was a second mother to her younger siblings. Then came George Jr., 16. After them were the 5 who would vanish: Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. The youngest of all, Sylvia, was just 2 years old. They were, by all accounts, a good-looking, well-behaved, and close-knit family. But beneath the surface of this idyllic family life, and the close-knit immigrant community, there were tensions. George Sodder was a man of strong opinions, and he was not afraid to voice them. He held a deep and abiding contempt for the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. In a community where many Italian immigrants still felt a sense of national pride or, at the very least, preferred to stay quiet on political matters, George's vocal anti-Mussolini stance made him enemies. He would often get into heated arguments with other members of the community who didn't share his views. This was not just casual political disagreement. In the hyper-politicized atmosphere of the 1930s and 40s, such arguments could curdle into genuine, lasting animosity. This background of political friction is not just color. It is a critical thread in the dark tapestry of this mystery. Let us now turn to that fateful day, Monday, December 24, 1945. Christmas Eve. The war was over, John was home. and the Sodder house was buzzing with festive energy. Marion had come home from her job at the dime store with gifts she had bought for the younger children. They were ecstatic, begging their mother to let them stay up late to play with their new toys. Jenny, exhausted from the holiday preparations, agreed. She told Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty that they could stay up a little later than usual, as long as the two older boys, John and George Jr., who were already asleep, were still awake when they went to bed. She reminded them to feed the cows and close the chicken coop before they turned in for the night. Then she took 2-year-old Sylvia and went up to bed with her husband, George. The stage for the night's events was set. The first strange note in the evening symphony of disaster sounded at around 12:30 a.m. The phone rang, piercing the quiet of the house. Jenny woke up and went downstairs to answer it. On the other end was a woman whose voice she didn't recognize, asking for a name she didn't know. Jenny told the caller she had the wrong number. The woman on the line let out a strange, weird-sounding laugh, then hung up. Jenny, unsettled but chalking it up to a simple mistake, noticed that the children were still awake. The lights were on, the curtains were open. She gave them a final reminder about their chores and went back upstairs to bed. This wrong number with its phantom laughter would be the last moment of normalcy in her life. About half an hour later at 1 a.m., Jenny was woken again. This time it was by a sound from outside. She described it as a loud thump on the roof, followed by a rolling noise, as if something had been thrown up there and had rolled down. Thinking little of it, perhaps a branch or an animal, she drifted back to sleep. The next time she woke, it was to a different sensation altogether. The smell of smoke. The room was filling with a thick, acrid haze. It was around 1:30 a.m. She woke George, and they both realized in a panic that the house was on fire. George's office, a small room on the ground floor where the telephone was located, was ablaze. Their first thoughts were for their children. They screamed their names, rousing John, George Jr., and Marion from their rooms. They all scrambled out of the house, joined by little Sylvia, whom Jenny had scooped up from her crib. Once outside in the freezing night air, they did a frantic head count. 6 of them were safe, but 5 were missing. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, who had been sleeping in 2 separate rooms in the attic, had not come out. What followed was a sequence of desperate, frantic attempts at rescue, each one thwarted by a circumstance so unlucky as to seem malevolent. George, his mind racing, first ran to the attic staircase, but it was already an impassable inferno, a roaring column of flame. His next instinct was to get a ladder, prop it against the side of the house, and climb up to the attic window to rescue his children. He ran to the spot beside the house where his heavy-duty ladder was always kept, always leaned against the wall. It was not there. It had vanished. Panic mounting, George thought of his 2 coal trucks. They were large, powerful vehicles. He could drive one right up to the side of the house and climb on top of it to reach the window. He jumped into the first truck and tried to start it. Nothing. The engine was dead. He frantically tried the second truck. It too was dead. Both trucks, which had been working perfectly the day before, were inexplicably useless. In a last-ditch effort, George tried to get water. He ran to a rain barrel they kept for just such an emergency. The water inside was frozen solid. The fire, meanwhile, was growing with unnatural speed, consuming the old dry timber of the house with a terrifying roar. The family could do nothing but stand in the snow, helpless, watching their home, and as they believed, their children being consumed by the flames. Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. The neighbor tried the phone, but the line was dead. The operator wouldn't answer. Another neighbor, seeing the blaze from the main highway, drove into Fayetteville and managed to track down the fire chief, a man named F.J. Morris. The response that followed is one of the most baffling and infuriating aspects of the entire case. Chief Morris, despite being the head of the fire department, apparently couldn't drive the fire truck. He had to wait for another firefighter who could. This led to an incomprehensible delay. The fire was reported around 1:30 a.m. The fire department did not arrive on the scene until 8 a.m., nearly 7 hours later. By then there was nothing left to save. The Sodder family home had been reduced to a pile of smoldering ash and a chimney stack, standing like a tombstone against the gray morning sky. In the cold, grim light of Christmas morning, the official investigation began and ended with breathtaking speed. Fire Chief Morris and the local police chief poked around in the ashes for a few minutes. They found no bones, no bodies, nothing to indicate that 5 children had been incinerated there. Despite this complete lack of physical evidence, within 2 hours, Chief Morris declared that the 5 missing children had undoubtedly died in the fire. He theorized that the blaze had been hot enough to completely cremate their bodies, leaving nothing behind. The cause of the fire was officially listed as faulty wiring. The coroner's office, based on this conclusion, issued 5 death certificates on December 30th. For the authorities, the case was closed. A terrible, tragic Christmas accident. But for George and Jenny Sodder, the nightmare was just beginning. Their grief was immense. but it was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing, insistent doubt. Nothing about the official story made sense to them. Jenny, in particular, could not accept the explanation that the fire had completely destroyed her children's bodies. She had worked in a crematorium and had spoken to an employee there, who told her that bones remain even after bodies are burned at 2000 degrees for 2 hours. The Sodder house fire had lasted for perhaps 45 minutes before the structure collapsed. How could it have generated enough heat to utterly obliterate 5 human skeletons? She conducted her own simple, grim experiments, burning small animal bones in their stove. The bones would char, but they would not vanish. George, too, was plagued by inconsistencies. The faulty wiring explanation felt wrong. He had recently had the entire house rewired by the local power company, who had declared it perfectly safe. Furthermore, if a wiring fire had started in the walls, the power should have cut out immediately. But Marion and Jenny both remembered the lights being on downstairs as they were escaping. How could this be? Their suspicion grew as they began to uncover more strange facts. George hired a telephone repairman to check the line that had failed on the night of the fire. The repairman made a shocking discovery. The line had not been burned through in the fire. It had been cut. Someone had climbed the utility pole 14 feet up and deliberately severed the line to the Sodder house. Then, George remembered the loud thump on the roof that Jenny had heard. Searching the yard, one of his sons found a small, hard, dark green rubber-like object. It was identified by some as the casing for a pineapple bomb, a type of handheld incendiary device used in warfare. This suggested the fire was not an accident but an act of arson. And what of the missing ladder? A few days after the fire, it was discovered in a location that made no sense. It had been thrown into a steep embankment about 75 feet away from the house, a place where no one would have casually left it. A witness later came forward claiming that they had seen a man stealing the ladder from the Sodders' property shortly before the fire, and had seen him loading it into a car. Slowly, a new and terrifying narrative began to form in the Sodders' minds. This was not a tragic accident. This was a deliberate act. The fire had been a diversion. The cut phone line, the disabled trucks, the stolen ladder, it was all part of a plan to isolate the family and prevent any rescue. Their children, they began to believe, had not died in the fire. They had been kidnapped. This nascent theory was bolstered by memories of several sinister events that had preceded the fire. A few months earlier, a strange man had come to the house, trying to sell George life insurance. When George refused, the man became aggressive and issued a chilling warning. "Your goddamn house is going to go up in smoke," he snarled. "And your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." The threat was explicit, linking George's anti-fascist politics directly to the safety of his family. Another incident involved a different man who had come looking for hauling work. When George turned him down, the man pointed to the fuse boxes at the back of the house and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." At the time, George dismissed it as the sour grapes of a disgruntled job seeker. In hindsight, it felt like another ominous piece of the puzzle. The true crime conspiracy was no longer a vague suspicion. It was taking on a defined, terrifying shape. Driven by the growing conviction that their children were alive, George and Jenny dedicated their lives to finding them. They refused to accept the official verdict and began their own investigation. A desperate quest for truth that would consume all their resources and the rest of their days. They started by pressuring the authorities to reopen the case, but were met with a frustrating wall of indifference and, at times, what felt like outright obstruction. Their first major breakthrough, if it can be called that, came from the endless stream of tips and alleged sightings that began to pour in. A woman who ran a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston claimed to have seen the children in the days after the fire. She said they were in a car with Florida license plates, and that the adults with them refused to let them have any food or drink at her stop. A waitress at a Charleston hotel saw their pictures in the paper and contacted the Sodders, convinced she had served the children breakfast the morning after the fire. She recalled them being with 2 men and 2 women, all of Italian extraction, who kept them quiet and whisked them away quickly when she tried to make conversation. There were other, more fleeting sightings. A woman in St. Louis claimed Martha was living in a convent there. A man in Texas wrote to them saying he'd had a conversation in a bar with the man who got drunk and confessed to being Louis Sodder. Each tip was a jolt of hope, a potential end to their torment. George traveled across the country, following every lead, no matter how tenuous. He would arrive in a town only to find the trail had gone cold, the sighting was a case of mistaken identity, or the person who sent the tip had vanished. Each dead end was another turn of the screw, another small death for his hope. Frustrated with the lack of official action, the Sodders took their pleas public. In 1952, 7 years after the disappearance, they erected a large, stark billboard on Route 16, the main highway near their new home. It featured the pictures of their 5 missing children, their smiling black and white faces frozen in time. Below the pictures was a description of the case and the offer of a $5,000 reward for information, later doubled to $10,000. That billboard became an icon of the region, a permanent, heartbreaking fixture on the landscape. For nearly 40 years it stood as a silent testament to a family's undying love and an unsolved disappearance that had become a local legend. In the same year, they hired a private investigator from Washington, D.C. named C.C. Tipton. Tipton dug into the case with fresh eyes and uncovered more disturbing information that seemed to point to a local cover-up. He discovered that the insurance salesman who had threatened George was, in fact, a member of the coroner's jury that had ruled the fire an accident. This was a staggering conflict of interest. Why would a man who had threatened the family be allowed to sit in judgment of their fate? Tipton's most bizarre discovery, however, came from a local minister. The minister confessed that Fire Chief F.J. Morris, the man who had overseen the disastrously slow response and declared the children dead without evidence, had made a strange confession of his own. Morris allegedly told the minister that he had, in fact, found something in the ashes of the Sodder home, a human heart. He claimed he had secretly buried it in a dynamite box on the property. This was a bombshell. If true, it meant Morris had lied about finding no remains and had concealed evidence. Why? George confronted Morris, who admitted to the story and showed him the spot where he had supposedly buried the box. The Sodders, desperate for any physical proof, had the spot excavated. They found a metal box. With trembling hands they opened it. Inside was not a human heart. It was fresh beef liver, untouched by fire. The discovery was sickeningly surreal. The consensus was that Morris had planted the liver, perhaps hoping the Sodders would find it, accept it as proof of their children's death, and finally end their investigation. The act was so strange, so brazenly deceptive, that it defied rational explanation. Was Morris simply trying to bring what he saw as a painful delusion to a close? Or was he an active participant in a conspiracy, trying to throw the family off a scent that was getting too close to the truth? Whatever his motive, the incident destroyed any remaining faith the Sodders had in the integrity of the official investigation. It proved to them that someone in a position of authority was deliberately trying to deceive them. Years turned into decades. The surviving Sodder children grew up, married, and had children of their own, all under the long shadow of their lost siblings. George and Jenny grew old, their faces etched with a grief that never subsided. They followed every lead, wrote countless letters to the FBI who repeatedly declined to get involved, stating it was a local matter and prayed for a miracle. And then in 1968, 23 years after the fire, a miracle of a kind seemed to arrive. Jenny went to the mailbox one day and found a letter addressed to her. It had been postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, but had no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his late 20s or early 30s. He had dark, curly hair, dark eyes, and a strong, slightly asymmetrical face. The resemblance to her son Louis, who would have been around that age, was uncanny. On the back of the photograph was a cryptic handwritten message. It read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A 90132 or 35. The photograph was like a lightning bolt. It was the most tangible, hopeful piece of evidence they had received in over 2 decades. They stared at the face, seeing the familiar lines of their own family in his features. The message was baffling. Frankie was not a name connected to their family. Ill boys could be a misspelling of little boys. And the numbers, were they a zip code? A military serial number? A prison inmate number? They couldn't be sure. The Sodders hired another private detective, this time to investigate the photo and its Kentucky postmark. The detective took their money, traveled to Kentucky, and then promptly vanished, never contacting them again. It was yet another cruel twist of the knife. They added the picture of the young man to their billboard. A new face joining the gallery of the lost, a question mark made manifest. The photo, like everything else in this case, provided a tantalizing clue that led only to another dead end. George Sodder died in 1969, a year after the letter arrived, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of searching. His family said he never recovered from the disappearance of his children, that he died of a broken heart. Jenny continued the vigil alone. She wore black for the rest of her life, a permanent state of mourning. She tended to the billboard and the memorial garden she had planted on the site of their old home. She never gave up hope, never stopped believing that one day, one of her children would come home. She passed away in 1989. After her death, the remaining family members, weary from a lifetime of unanswered questions, finally made the painful decision to take the billboard down. It had stood for nearly 40 years, a monument to a mystery that refused to be solved. So, what happened to the 5 lost children of the Sodder family? We are left with 2 starkly different possibilities, each with its own set of arguments and its own profound implications. The first theory is the official one. It was all a tragic accident. The children perished in the fire, and their remains were completely consumed by the intensely hot blaze, which was fueled by the home's timber frame and the coals stored in the basement. The lack of bones, while unusual, is not, according to some experts, impossible. All the other strange occurrences, the cut phone line, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks were a string of incredible, tragic coincidences. The threats against George were real but ultimately unconnected to the fire. The sightings were cases of mistaken identity, the cruel projections of hope onto the faces of strangers. The beef liver was the bizarre, misguided act of a small-town official trying to bring closure to a grieving family. The Louis Sodder photo was a cruel hoax. This theory is the simplest. It requires the fewest assumptions, but it also requires us to ignore a staggering number of statistically improbable coincidences and unexplained anomalies. The second theory is the one the Sodder family came to believe, the true crime conspiracy. In this version of events, the children were not victims of a fire, but of a meticulously planned abduction. The motive was retribution against George Sodder for his outspoken criticism of Mussolini. The perpetrators, likely members of the local Italian mafia or fascist sympathizers, set the fire as a diversion. They cut the phone line, stole the ladder, and disabled the trucks to ensure the children could not be rescued and that the house would be completely destroyed, erasing any evidence of their crime. The children were then spirited away in the chaos of the night. This theory explains almost all of the bizarre elements of the case. It accounts for the threats, the sabotage, and the complete lack of remains. It suggests the strange incompetence and outright deception of the local authorities was not just ineptitude, but part of a cover-up, perhaps born of fear of the criminals responsible. The sightings in this light become credible clues, and the photo of Louis becomes the one piece of evidence that slipped through the kidnapper's grasp. We will likely never know the truth. The key players are all long dead. The trail, if there ever was one, has gone ice cold. The story of the Sodder children has transcended from a criminal case to a piece of American folklore, a chilling modern legend whispered around campfires in the Appalachian Hills. It is a story whose power lies in its profound, aching ambiguity. It is a testament to the terrifying thought that children can simply vanish, erased by fire and silence, and that a family's love can fuel a search that lasts a lifetime and still come up empty. The mystery endures, a scar on the heart of West Virginia. Thank you for joining us on this deep and troubling dive into the unsolved disappearance of the Sodder children. It is a case that presents us not with answers, but with a labyrinth of haunting questions. What do you believe happened on that Christmas Eve in 1945? Was it a tragic, if highly unusual, accident? Or do the strange clues point to a dark conspiracy? A story of revenge and abduction that was successfully covered up for decades. The photo of the man believed to be Louis Sodder is particularly haunting. Do you think it was a cruel prank? Or a genuine message from a long-lost son? We would love to hear your theories and thoughts in the comments below. This is a mystery that belongs to all of us now, and every perspective adds to the conversation. If you found this exploration of one of history's most compelling cold cases to be engaging, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to bring these forgotten stories out of the shadows and into the light. Until next time, hold your loved ones close, and remember that sometimes, the most frightening mysteries are the true ones. The ones where the final page of the story was torn out and never found. Good night.